Thanks, everybody, for being here and participating. Do we have, I think we've got everybody. Let's see, 1, 2, 3.
Seem to be missing Mike.
Yeah. I think he's up north. Hopefully he's getting reception wherever he's at. We can give him one more minute. Okay, I guess Mike is on his way. All right, let's get started. Thanks, everybody. This is the Thursday, October 22nd, 2020 meeting of the Board of Directors of the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority. A quorum is present and we'll begin. Item 1 is to approve our agenda. Can I have somebody move that? Ms. Gott, seconded by Mr. Hewitt. Any objections to the board or modifications to the agenda? If not, we'll go down the list and vote. I don't see Mike. Mike, you're not on yet, are you? All right. Mr. Chang?
Yes.
Ms. Gott?
Yes.
Mr. Hess?
Yes.
Mr. Hewitt?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Mozak Betts?
Yes.
Ms. Sims?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes, so that's moved into the record. Item 2 or 1.2 is public comment. Do we have anybody who wishes to address the board this evening on any of our agenda items? Mr. Book?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we do have one. One moment. This is Mr. Jim Mogensen. You've been unmuted.
Yes. So this is Jim Mogensen. So I got the board of directors meeting agenda on time, and I was looking through it today, and I saw a couple things. Well, a couple things I wanted to say. First is relating to the opening up of the transit centers coming up for the for use of the bathrooms. I would suggest contacting someone, if it hasn't already happened, at the Office of Community and Economic Development at the county. Because this didn't come up at the latest housing meeting I was at. And I think you might want to do that just so everybody kind of understands what's happening as the people who are in the homeless population try to cope with how to manage that. As is mentioned, it's one of the few places for bathrooms. The second thing was the Title VI plan. I did start looking through the draft plan this afternoon. It's 117 pages long. And the thing that I sensed was we had this challenge. The consultant's report was kind of pre-pandemic. And so now we have pandemic, and we have, if you remember, the July board of directors meeting, which had 21 people in the public comment. And so somehow we need to figure out how in a pandemic mode, restoration mode, we have a way of analyzing how to make some of those service changes and how that kind of stuff is going to work. And lastly, the issues people have been letting me know about all the little quirks happening with the service restoration plan. So I'm sure you're also getting those as well. But if not, I might be a source of information because people know I'm interested in this and come to the board meeting. So they let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anybody else?
No, we don't have anyone else at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll close the public comment and go to 1.3 general announcements. Do we have anybody from the board or staff who have general announcements this evening?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I just had a raised hand. Would you be open to having another public comment?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. It just came in. This is Sharice Robertson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Sharice Robertson. I'm a customer with AATA. I've been a customer for approximately 3 years, and I'm here to raise some concerns that I've been experiencing since the pandemic. I work with the University of Michigan Hospital. I'm a frontline worker. I've been working through the entire pandemic. However, this scheduling that has changed since August the 30th has caused a lot of stress for me. The route that I normally take is the 26th and or the 29th. And what I'm experiencing now more so than ever is I can get to certain destinations that I may need to, but I have a hard time getting back home. It takes me a lot longer to get there. A lot of times I'm walking 2 miles to get to a certain destination and even back home. So I live on Scioto Ridge, and I apologize because I've never sat in on one of your meetings before. So if I'm taking up too much time, please let me know. But I live off of Scioto Ridge. At night, the Flex Ride, the night service, will not come to my address to pick me up. And I have to walk a quarter of a mile in the dark. There's no lighting. I don't feel secure. I don't feel safe just to meet the Flex Ride driver that will take me into work at the hospital. In the morning, they will come to Scioto Ridge or Scioto Township and drop me off. And I have to take a bus from the University of Michigan Hospital. I take the 23 down to the Blake. And once I'm at the Blake, I wait for the 32. The 32 will get me to the parking ride approximately 7:25 in the morning. I try to make a reservation about 7:40 a.m. for a pickup with the Flex Ride, which will take me home. Now, there's only one bus, the 32, that leaves the Blake at 7:15 in the morning. If I should happen to be late for any reason, if the weather the winter is coming up, if the weather holds up the bus, then that's the only bus that is available to take someone to the park and ride until 3:15 p.m. Monday through Friday. However, on the weekends, there are multiple scheduled times for the 32 to go to the park and ride from the Blake. The other things that I've been experiencing is when I've had doctor's appointments, trying to get to the bank, trying to get to the grocery store. I can get to the grocery store, but get uh, I can't get home. However, when they drive me from the park and ride down Maple Road, we pass right by my physical therapy office, and the boundaries prevent them from letting me get to the doctor's appointment and also allowing me to get home from the doctor's appointment. So my question is there any way you can expand or release what we have already set up as boundaries? Because they say this is the night ride boundaries, and this is, you can only travel between Scioto Township, within Scioto Township during the daytime. And then at nighttime, you can only go within the Ann Arbor parameters. So I don't see how that is helping people who need to go between both Township and Ann Arbor, and also Pittsfield Township and Ypsilanti. I don't travel as much to the Ypsilanti area, but because I'm uh, I guess in the Scioto Township district, um, I can't get to Ann Arbor. I have to go to get to Liberty and Stadium. I have to call the Flex Ride. The Flex Ride will pick me up during the daytime at my address, drive me to Wagner and Jackson Road, where I have to wait for the number 30 bus, which will take me to downtown Blake, where I then have to take a 28, which will take me to Pauline and Stadium. Now, I bank at TCF Bank, which is at Pauline and Stadium. But for me to get to my pharmacy on Stadium and Liberty, I have to walk all the way down Stadium to get to the CVS. And then my own personal experience, once I was walking down, once I got to my pharmacy, and then I wanted to go home, I'm calling as I'm walking. Can I get a ride from anywhere from here to get home? And there was no address that I could use. There's no way that I could get a flex ride to take me home, which meant I had to walk again from Stadium and Liberty all the way to Scioto Ridge and Liberty. And I
So,
was
Ms. Roberson, we usually have like a 3-minute time limit.
okay. And if I could just say this one last thing, and and I'll wrap it up until I'm able, if I am able to speak again. I work the midnight shift, and so for me to stay over and awake again. Like I'm on my way into work tonight, but I wanted to participate in this meeting. It's hard for me to juggle these times and then work all night long and then have to walk miles and miles or even a half a mile sometimes carrying groceries and bags and things like that to get to my destination. So my plea and my ask for you all is to consider at least opening up some of these routes that have been closed down. And for my own personal experience, the 26 and the 29, because I don't feel safe walking at night that distance in the dark. And I don't see how we can flip this script where, you can get to this place during the day, but not at night and vice versa.
So I will have somebody on Mr. Carpenter's staff will get in contact with you about some of these issues and reach out to you to try to solve some of these issues with you.
Okay, I appreciate that. I've spoken with Miss Latanya Hargrave, who was very professional. She's very patient in listening to my concerns. However, I've had some really unfortunate experiences with some of the golden limousine dispatchers where I feel like I've been denied rides because of friction between trying to understand where I can go and where I can't go, and the timing. The drivers for Golden Limousine have been professional. They've been timely, and it's been a good experience in that aspect. But I am really having a hard time at this moment with scheduling with one or two people, and I feel like I am a burden because I have to call every day to arrange rides to and from work. And I feel like they have the power to say, okay, no, this, and they say they don't have enough people to provide for each uh, area that they're supposed to be servicing. And
Well, Again, I'm sorry for your experience. We do have, again, a 3-minute time limit.
Yes.
We're about at 10 minutes now, so I
Okay,
need to move on, but I will have somebody from Mr. Carpenter staff reach out to you directly.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith, do we have anybody else who wants to address the board this evening?
No, we don't, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking that last minute call.
Thank you. We'll close public comment and then move on to 1.3 general announcements. Are there any general announcements from the board, anybody on the board or the staff this evening? Not seeing anybody, then we'll close section 1, move on to section 2, consent agenda. We have minutes and committee meeting reports in the packet. Can I have somebody move the consent agenda? Kathleen, seconded by Raymond. All those in favor of the consent agenda, say yes or no. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also yes. So that's unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to section 3, which is policy monitoring and development. This is the opportunity for a committee meeting discussion is 3.1. Does anybody want to discuss anything on the committee meeting agendas that was on the agenda notes or the committee notes? I think this might be a good opportunity to discuss a little bit. I know it came up at both the committee meetings and I wanted to have some full board discussion about going forward, possibly with a board retreat. And thanks for the dialogue. I saw everybody's notes. Is there anything that anybody wanted to raise in particular to the board in general regarding either format, topics, or anything else in particular that they wanted to talk about, positive or negative or otherwise, or just for consideration regarding board retreats or a possible board retreat? Roger?
Yeah, I'm fine with the suggested topics. I'm sort of assuming that scenario-based service planning is sort of long-range look at service planning options in a very general sense.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? All right, probably by next meeting then, we'll put this back on the agenda and come up with a suggested format. I'm looking possibly at doing a half day since we're doing it virtually. Sitting there for 8 hours and looking at each other through Zoom is going to be a little difficult. So we might break it up into 2 half days, one possibly for strategic planning and one maybe for educational topics, but we'll still flesh that out a little bit. Anybody have any particular topics or anything that they want to make sure that is considered as a topic for a board retreat? Anything in of particular interest to anybody? Okay. Well, we'll come up with a recommendation as a governance committee and come back to the board for discussion and some decisions in a month for November. So thank you. 3.2 is the board's work plan. We have some discussion about it in the board packet on page 30. You'll see in the past what we've done in terms of other board topics, and there's some recommended topics that we've covered in the past there. The governance committee talked about and me in particular, we talked about getting past managing the crisis of the day, the crisis du jour, and actually getting back to, even though it might look very different than what we've done in the past, something resembling a board work plan, looking to the future, looking to, do more than just review, monitoring reports and talking about committee reports and budgets and the like. So we thought we would at least try to get something close to a normal board work plan in front of us and see what the board thought. One, about tackling some of these topics, board education, strategic planning and visioning, that kind of thing, takes on particular relevance in the era that we find ourselves, global pandemic wise, and the financial situation that we find ourselves. So you see in what we've done in the past, and maybe some suggested topics there for policy development, things we could look into. My own personal view is that we should look, I think some of these education topics are very good. Some of them we've covered already. Ridership versus coverage, we've kind of resolved, but long range planning process, bus networks, multimodalism might be another one that we could topic, particularly in global pandemic area. Regionalism might be something else we want to look at. But are there any, given what we have in front of us, which is on attachment 2, any board discussion on board work plan or particular board work plan items that they want to see going forward for this fiscal year? Kathleen?
Hi, thank you, Eric, or Mr. Mahler. My biggest,
You can call me Eric, it's all right.
thank you. As we've been hearing from our public and things that are going on, I really think that we need to get a handle on our ownership linkage, how we're going to beef that up, how we're going to do it. In the pandemic, we've certainly seen that we have areas of need, and the public is showing their concerns. So that would be an area that I'm very interested in, and I think that we should move on. Another area that, something that was brought up tonight by Ms. Roberson, when I'm hearing from her, part of the issue to me in my mind and what I visualize, and Brian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have different contracts within different cities. So Ann Arbor is different than Scioto Township, which is different than Pittsfield, which is different than, and I think that I would like to have a better understanding of how that works so that I can help our customers understand, you know, how all of that goes on. But there's such a huge difference between all of them. I would like some clarification. So those are my 2 areas.
Anybody else? Jesse, I think you were had a comment. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It's actually kind of a combination of 2 proposed topics here. The social equity, and also the I guess maybe kind of general the future of public transportation post pandemic. I'm very interested in what lessons we've learned from the pandemic in terms of which of our riders really do depend on our service. Like how did demographics change during the pandemic, and how that should inform our future work. So that we're, and with an eye towards like not just being a commuter system, like finding out really, yeah, like what how are our buses being used during the pandemic? What does that tell us about who our dedicated or really our core ridership is, and what can we do to make sure that they are and continue to be well served?
Are you thinking about that in terms of just adjusting, I guess, long range planning, or just adjusting our ends, or to what end would you like to get that information?
I think both long range planning and our ends. We've we have this kind of glib saying of, we're prioritizing ridership over coverage, which, has tended to mean certain things under normal circumstances. But I'm very curious to see what we've learned about what ridership is during the pandemic. So I guess if we're going to be doing this retreat soon, I think that could really inform our examination, our interpretation of our ends. Because I feel like I'm starting to feel like maybe some of the terms that I've used in the past might have different meanings to me now than they did before. So I guess maybe more generally, I'm very interested in like a lessons learned from the pandemic about sorry about ridership.
Okay. Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, I would hope out of the retreat, there are certain things I particularly would like to see information or views coming out, particularly on reviewing our ends, resource allocation, and probably ownership linkage. I was hope that the retreat would lead into some follow-up in those three areas.
So say those again. You said ownership linkage. What
Ownership
else?
linkage, resource allocation, and ends review.
Okay. Others?
I just want to kind of piggyback off of Jesse's comment. I think we do need to re-examine ridership versus coverage. And I think that it would be helpful. I don't know, what kind of data can be put together in time for a retreat or, for next year to see, again, like Jesse said, who are the core demographic that we are serving during the pandemic. Like I have an idea in my mind, but it would be nice to actually have some data if it's even possible to get that, because I do think we might need to reevaluate how we look at ridership versus coverage. It's such a hard topic. And I do think that when we revised the ends, we thought we ended up in one place. And I think that post-pandemic or during pandemic, we might end up a different place.
Yeah. Well, and I just to be clear, I mean, there's topics for the retreat and then there's the board work plan. So I just want to make sure we don't load all this up and have unreal expectation of the retreat. Some of this can be ongoing studying and work that can be done as part of the board work plan that we can undertake, which can include board education topics like ridership coverage, things like that, or they can be retreat topics that we can, like lessons learned from the pandemic and, ridership coverage, resource allocation. I'm not sure which one that would probably, it'd probably fall into the work plan because that's an ongoing thing, but, we'll have to think about that. Any others? Mike?
Yeah, I'd just like to say in support what both Jesse and Kyra said. I think even though we seemed like forever talking about ridership versus coverage, and we were very happy to get that behind us, I think the pandemic has brought that back. And I think it's important for us to look at that again. And I guess I'm somewhat ambivalent about whether that should be part of a work plan or part of a retreat. But I think it's an important issue, one that we know it was important and is important. And I think the answer could be different now.
Yeah. We've got some support for the ridership coverage / resource allocation topic. Somewhere Prashant is smiling. Anybody else?
And Eric, it could be that we just end up with a couple more task forces to revisit this and come back to the board. We might have to assemble those again.
Well, yeah, we might do that. I think I'm thinking in my head that, I think the place to start would be in a committee, one or the other. And I wasn't really, I hadn't decided which committee would tackle which one yet, at least to set up the framework of the work itself. And then we could decide if it's a committee task or it's a task group or a task force that looks into it, or one of the 3 committees could look into it. So what I'm hearing though is, and please, somebody speak up if you have any objections to these, but it sounds like we're looking at things like ridership coverage, re-examining that, understanding our networks and ridership a little bit better, and from the lessons learned point of view, to Jesse's point about what, when you really get down to it, who is the real got to have this life or death service ridership out there. Resource allocation and ends review, to Roger's point, coming out of a retreat, and the future of transit sounds like also one. So anybody else, or anybody have any objections to any of those topics possibly?
And I just want to clarify, those topics for the work plan or those topics for the retreat?
Yeah, good question. So I'll have to think about which ones lend themselves to which. I mean, things like ends review, we usually do at a retreat. I'm not sure though that, it sounds like to me ends review in light of the, I'm not sure that ends review is something we want to do unless and until we have some of these other data points and important topics fleshed out first. For instance, the ridership coverage, where do we stand on that? Where do we stand now on the lessons learned from the pandemic? To me, it doesn't make sense to start reviewing the ends, which I think would be in the future and probably past the time for a retreat, unless we, put the retreat way into the future and we solve the rest of these first. But it sounds to me, I think a board retreat is kind of tackling something that is something we can get our arms around, something meaningful, something that will move the needle, and something that's needed, but we don't usually get a chance to talk about. So that might be revisiting ridership coverage. That might be I think a good, Jesse just raised the kind of re-examining, or I think Kathleen actually, raised the, kind of the deep dive into how our networks are working and connected, and so we can help educate the public. That might be something that would be good for, the operations or planning team to respond to for us. So I'll have to think about it a little bit, but I think right now we're just voting on the work plan, not the retreat. So I think I confused probably the issue more than I did to clarify it. But so, Sue, do you have any particular thoughts either way about what goes on a work plan or what goes on a retreat?
Well, the ridership coverage, I liked Kyra had suggested maybe that was one that could go into a committee or a task force. But for me, if that happens, it would be good for that to happen in advance of the retreat, because I actually think it's a topic that we all probably need to do the work together on. So to me, the value of the retreat is thinking about work that we should do as a group. It could be that committees bring background into the retreat, but that's a pretty heady one. So it's one I think we would benefit from talking as a group at a retreat where we could really make some progress.
Yeah. Rich, I think you had do you have a comment?
Yeah, it pretty much overlays on top of everything, for instance, like Kyra and Justine and others have talked about, because the future of public transportation, to me, that's pretty broad. And so I just want to really specifically call out, I think it'd be helpful if we had a discussion around alternative transportation options, as microtransit, we get smaller vehicles, et cetera, especially in light of this issue we're facing with COVID, where we have these big buses, but we can only fit so many folks in there in order to meet certain sanitation requirements, that kind of thing. So I didn't know if I thought it would be a good discussion among all of us to even talk down to what may seem a little silly is even scooters or whatever. Because I know in some cities or towns, the public transportation service is looking into, like, do they also take over those type of options for getting folks between borders of a particular city?
Jesse, do you have another hand up? I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Going back to your earlier question of or rather the question of retreat versus work plan. I think I'm thinking this in terms of board education that would inform something that we would talk about at the retreat. I feel like so I know at the retreat, I think the policy dictates that we at least re-examine the ends. I think there was something in there about that. But I feel like I need education in order to make an informed decision regarding ends. So depending on what the schedule for the retreat is, there's certain board education items I'd like to this is a board education item that I would like to prioritize as preparation for the retreat. And it seems like a topic to me that's probably big enough that I don't know that we'd want to combine the education into the retreat, especially if we're talking about having a shortened retreat. As you know, this is a huge topic, and so trying to combine education and decision making into one event sounds daunting, to say the least. So that's what that was my thought there. And then completely, while I have my mic open, I was also interested in the multi-jurisdictional considerations. It's a board education topic. I missed the service committee meeting, and I wasn't there for the discussion of the status of the BRT project, which is a perfect example of multi-jurisdictional considerations, considering we're talking about a corridor that spans at least 4 jurisdictions. I think if you consider Ipsy Township, City of Ann Arbor, like Pittsfield's in there somewhere, not to mention MDOT. So that's a topic that I would very much like to have some education on.
Okay. So any other comments or questions, thoughts? Okay. Perhaps at the governance committee level with the staff, we can talk. We have a meeting coming up soon. Maybe we can add this to our agenda to flesh out based on what we've heard tonight, what makes sense to go into the work plan and what makes sense to go into the retreat. So I'll make that a topic, and then perhaps before our next board meeting, we can make some suggestions, and then people can be prepared to comment, and we can set the table at the next board meeting. I also didn't want to exclude and make sure I recognize Kathleen's vote for ownership linkage, which is obviously going to be very important going forward. So I think that's an ongoing work plan item that we can probably easily add to the work plan, and is our biggest task as a board anyway. Anything else? Okay. All right, that's it for work plan. We'll go to monitoring reports 3.3. I think in the packet we had the policy on 211. I'll turn it over to Mr. Carpenter if he wants to make some comments about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what you have here is monitoring report on policy 211. It's communication and support to the board. I'm going to hit the highlights and then open it up for if there's any question or discussion. So you'll see on the second page of the report, which is page 34 of your packet, the beautiful color-coded conclusions about compliance in the upper table. There is one policy that we are noting is only in partial compliance. That's 211.11, which has to do with, frankly, not adhering to the schedule for submitting monitoring reports. But this has been discussed, I think, in the past. Really, the pandemic disrupted staff's ability to submit those on time. And we're still sort of recovering from that. But nevertheless, it is an incident of non-compliance. Because of that, the overall policy is recognized to be only partially compliant. But that is the only deficit that we are reporting this time around. I'll draw your attention to page 50. which includes notes from Rose Mercier. We've begun to ask her for her input and feedback on these monitoring reports. So these are her comments verbatim. She did note two policies, 211.16 and 211.161 may actually be prescriptions and could be accommodated along with other general requests for information under 211.5 or 211.15, excuse me. And then she noted in her fourth point that there appears to be an absence of a common policy in our manual. She's referring to a policy about the CEO shall not impede the board's holism, misrepresent its processes or role, impede its lawful obligations, and then has two additional sub-policies. I've double checked. She is correct. That is in the original template as written by John Carver. It did not, however, appear in the template that we used to develop our manual. You may recall that template was given to us by our first policy governance consultant. I do not have an explanation for you about why. I do not know. So I thank Rose for pointing out it's probably unintentional absence, and it's perhaps something the board would want to consider putting back in. And then the survey results. Thank you to the 5 board members who replied. A couple of good points about additional communication on some things like the regional transit discussion back around New Year's, or as I like to think of it, a lifetime ago. There was a big to-do about that, and probably some communication opportunities there. And then also on page 52, a note about communication surrounding the Route 47 Park Ridge decision in South Ypsilanti. Both, I think, are fair comments. So with that, I am recommending or asking that the board consider accepting this report. Excuse me. As indicating an acceptable level of compliance. It is, we do have one area of partial incompliance, but otherwise we think we're compliant down the rest of the board.
Okay, any discussion or questions for the CEO on the monitoring report or this topic in general? Mike, go ahead.
I'd first like to compliment Matt and his staff. I think it is a very complete, thorough, and conscientious report. The one area that he pointed out in terms of timing, I think we can all, at least I remember, and I imagine most of us remember, that really when the pandemic came along, various board members encouraged the delay of those reports because we thought timing was much more important to be focused on the pandemic and the issues related to that. So I mean, it's certainly true that they were delayed, but I don't really think it's a black mark against him because we really encourage that. I'd also like to mention something about the governance coach notes. In particular, I really think some of those issues in terms of holism and other things such as not favoring the certain board members over others are quite important. And I think we should certainly consider adding those. And I guess what I'd like to suggest is, and also looking at 211.1.6, is assigning, looking at these notes to perhaps a committee and coming back with recommendations, because I think those are significant things that we should be looking at. It doesn't have to be immediate, but I think we shouldn't forget about it. We should at least put it on a list of things to be considered in the future within 6 or 12 months.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody else? Any thoughts or further comments on the governance notes about adding those recommended policies from the original template into the actual policy manual? We could defer this, since it's more or less a governance issue, to the governance committee for further consideration and recommendation, or if people are ambivalent, don't know, haven't made up their minds yet, we can have governance look at it. If everybody feels strongly one way or the other, we could have that discussion right now. Anybody care to make a comment or have a thought? Roger?
Yeah, I think we should refer this to the governance committee to come back with a recommendation for the next board meeting.
Does anybody have an issue with that? Okay, not hearing any objections, I'll make a note to defer this to governance, and we can add it to the next governance committee agenda. Okay, so to make a decision on accepting the monitoring report, the staff's recommendation is to accept it at level B, in compliance, except for items noted. There's also A, in compliance, C, making reasonable progress toward compliance, D, not in compliance, not making reasonable progress, or E, cannot be determined. Can I have somebody move one of those for a recommendation for a vote? Kathleen?
I'd like to recommend B, please.
Yeah. Do I have a second? Kyra? And we'll vote on B. We'll just go through the list here. Say yes or no for acceptance. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
I'm also yes. So that passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to section 4. 4.1 is recovery plan updates. This is a verbal update. We'll go back to Mr. Carpenter for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the temporary services, the interim service plan is functioning. We are making plans with the budget that you approved just a month or so ago. We're looking to November for some service enhancements as discussed as part of that. So we look forward to bringing in more services. We did communicate out to stakeholders in advance about those. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, have we started publicly announcing that information?
No, not yet.
Okay.
We're going to be holding town halls. November 4th is the first public one.
And when are we publicly sharing the increases or the changes?
I don't believe we have a firm date set for that. We're trying to get the publicity documents put together as quickly as possible.
Thank you. It's a running series of improvements, moving very quickly to bring things back online. We're also looking forward to having some more firm information about larger scale recovery to share with you over the next month. So please stay tuned with that. And I look to Brian and John and Forrest to say, is there anything else at this point we would add about recovery and service improvements? Brian?
Last month, I had presented to the board a graph showing how much service we had and what our ridership was. And I have that to share again this evening and can mail it out as well.
You have it to share virtually?
I do.
Please do.
And as you can see, we've maintained about 61% of our services back, and our ridership continues at the moment to be flat. This does not include last week, which was the start of I believe it was last week, start of U of M's lockdown. But we have not seen the ridership increase as the service has increased. Unfortunately, I don't have any grand explanation of that. I wish I did, but Forrest and I are working on trying to come to some understanding of exactly what that is and why. But I said last month that I would share this, so here it is again.
And I'll add to that. I haven't heard or seen anything on a national or state level to suggest any other transit system is seeing anything different. Ridership seems to be down and staying down. A lot of people are just staying home, not traveling. But to some of the, I think, rightful questions earlier about the work plan and education topics, those who continue to ride, obviously, we are an essential service. So we're happy to continue to be there for them. John, Forrest, anything else you'd like to add?
No report this month.
Nothing more from me.
There are some other things in the CEO's report, I think, that are relevant that I could touch on, having to do with service restoration.
Go ahead.
I'm happy to stop here and see if there are any questions.
Any questions on the graph or updates to this point, Mike? You're still muted. Mike, you're still muted.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, what I was saying is I lost everything on the visual, so I couldn't find the unmute button. And Brian, your chart, I don't think anybody can read what the dates are at the bottom. Are those weekly, the bars, are they weekly? And when is, and it's not in front of me now. Let's see if I can get it back. Yeah, now I have the visual. Could you put it back? There it is. Where you get to the last increase in service hours, what date is that? And are those weekly bars?
They are weekly bars, and the date of that is when we increase service on August 30th.
So that's August 30th. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I mean, is it any more complicated than we see a huge spike nationally as well as in our own area of cases? I mean, I would think, yeah, I mean, under normal circumstances, if the virus was retreating, we might see a different change in this. But I mean, I'm just taking the real simple Occam's razor approach. As we, see a spike in cases, it's just making people, the people who must ride, but everybody else is just more hesitant at this point. Is it anything more than that? I don't know.
Unfortunately, I don't either. We are in the unusual situation of continuing to encourage people not to ride. We still broadcast essential trips only. We continue to get questions about that. Well, can I ride? Well, you have to decide for yourself what an essential trip is, but we do have limits on how many people we can transport at a time.
Right.
So.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Kathleen, then Jesse.
Since we're talking about ridership versus coverage, I know we had allowed for and brought more drivers on because our higher volume trips, like the 4, the 6, the 5, we were concerned that we were going to have to roll out several buses at a time point. So let's say a pickup is 6:15 at the Blake, that one bus may not be able to accommodate maybe there are 40 passengers and only 20 can go on a bus. Have we seen an uptick of needing multiple buses to handle any time point, or are we still using one bus per time point right now?
We have not seen an uptick in that regard to date, and I think that's reflected in the counts.
One of the reasons we wanted to reduce service and thinking back to April was uncertainty about crowding at this point. I think this is good that Kathleen is reminding of us of that. We had no idea what to expect. We had no idea if or how the university would return to functioning, and crowding was a significant concern. Hasn't really appeared to occur. So that's, I suppose, a positive thing that Brian isn't having to put in trippers or double headers, we sometimes call them, to reduce crowding.
Jesse, go ahead. Then Mike.
Thank you for the report, Brian. I had a few questions. One was, how is FlexRide incorporated into those ridership numbers? Is it an apples to apples comparison versus, specifically where FlexRide is kind of substituting for fixed route?
So those numbers are purely fixed route only. They're not part of the FlexRide numbers are not reported in there. So I'd have to pull up different numbers to get that information.
Actually, that alone is helpful. Have we seen an increase in FlexRide that kind of corresponds to the increase in FlexRide service?
Yes.
Okay. I have two other questions. One, how often are buses filling up? We talked about discouraging people from riding so buses don't fill up. Like, how much is that happening?
I've not had it's actually similar to Kathleen's question in terms of how often are we sending out extra buses per time point. So far, we have not needed to do that. We've not been getting the calls since the 30th that we have full buses that we had predicted would happen. They haven't come back.
All right. Do we have our route by route ridership tracking? Not that I'm okay. If that's something that can be easily compiled, that's something I'm really interested in for my own edification. Kind of going back to those questions on what are we learning from changes in ridership patterns through the pandemic, and I'm kind of curious if there've been any interesting patterns in how ridership has changed on a route by route. What we're seeing is like an average across the system, and I'm wondering if certain commuter routes are seeing a larger drop, whereas more local routes are not seeing as steep of a drop because there's people relying on them. That's a hypothesis, but I'm kind of curious to see how data bears that out. Not that I work for you and can make any decisions, but those are the kinds of things that I would I think will inform my kind of policy decision making.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Others? I think, Mike, you had a hand up, then Sue.
Yeah, yes, I did. And actually, Jesse kind of asked the question I was going to ask, and it had to do with FlexRide. Since FlexRide is replacing certain fixed route, it's a service for what used to be for fixed route riders. Are we seeing increases in it? And I think he said yes to that question. But I think it would be good to have some kind of a magnitude on that at some time. Since we're hearing a lot about that from our riders in terms of FlexRide and whether it's fitting their needs and so forth. I hope, because we put a lot into that in terms of filling in for where we don't have the fixed routes anymore. Uh, it'd be nice to know how that is doing.
We have that information.
Good.
Sue, go ahead.
Thanks, Eric. I think I heard in the last month or two some conversation about our buses' airflows as winter arrives, and the anticipation that windows would be closed. I wanted to raise that from a public health standpoint, and I sure appreciate that it's warmer with windows closed. But if we're thinking about the health and safety of our riders and our drivers, I would think keeping airflow by keeping windows open during the winter. And Brian or Matt, you may have seen the work that the College of Engineering did, the School of Public Health, and the engineering modeling that was done for the U of M buses. So can you just speak a little bit to what your practice is going to be with airflow over the winter?
Sure, and I'll actually ask Brian to respond to, but I think it's kind of a two-part question, essentially dealing with do we have a policy about keeping windows open or not? And then what about ventilation in general? Brian?
So we are going to keep them open through the wintertime. That's actually been part of our part of the plan. Candace has done a lot of work in looking at airflows and how the additions that we've added change what the airflow is for the driver. We have upgraded the fleet's air filters. So we have a higher quality air filter that is more effective at trapping smaller particles. And then we are also currently testing a UV light system in the buses that actually kills kills viruses. And in addition to that, coated surfaces inside the buses with an antimicrobial, so it kills viruses and bacteria. And then that's part of the test is we've been given little strips to then test and see how effective that is against a control on reducing the amount of microbes in the bus. So we're doing that. Haven't put it into a report yet because we don't know the answers, but we're doing that and installing UV systems in the HVAC at each of the facilities.
Yeah, that's great. And I just wanted to raise it publicly because I think the efforts that you're putting forward, Brian, are fantastic. And I just wanted fellow board members to be aware of, a lot of the modeling and a lot of the data that's been done looking at these systems. And boy, you just can't beat having some fresh air flowing in addition to all the other strategies that you're describing. So while I appreciate we might get some complaints from our riders, I think it's well worth the trade-off. And, for any of our riders who are our owners who are watching the board meeting tonight, I just wanted to stress the value of, the efforts that we're making to try to keep riders safe for those that need to be riding our buses. So thank you for your effort.
Of course. And if I can, to make a short plug, the Nova buses that are getting delivered next year, the 7 in the production run, will actually have a fresh air scoop on them for this exact purpose, so that it'll come through the HVAC system and get conditioned some, so we won't have to force the windows to be open. They were able to make that adjustment, not for the pilot bus that we have, but we do have it coming in the 7 that are coming next year.
Any other questions, comments? The staff on this? Jesse?
One more question I want to ask you, Brian. I guess kind of generally, how are operators doing? I was hearing a story today that was particularly troubling about, I think it's coming out of New York, where certain operators who are in a position of, enforcing mask wearing are running into it's kind of the same sorts of things that we're seeing all over the country. And there was an operator that was actually pulled out of the bus and assaulted. Unfortunately, the riders on the bus, pinned the person who did that. But I understand this must be an incredibly stressful time for operators, and I'm wondering how they're feeling in terms of their own personal safety and what's being expected of them.
So we have equipped all of the buses with dispensers for masks. And so it's easy to direct a passenger to put on a mask. It is a stressful, it's a stressful job outside of the pandemic. And frankly, during the pandemic, I could not be prouder really of the work that our frontline folks have been doing. And I don't have as cute noises in the background as you. It is puppy noises though, I'll say that. But I think they are appreciative of the efforts that we have taken, the barriers. We have started the install on those. We're pausing just for a moment because we need to get a slightly different window arrangement. So they'll be all installed by December. So we do provide protection in that regard, and we have the temporary barriers up. A bus doesn't roll if it doesn't have the barrier. The Nova pilot bus came and it has a barrier in it now. So I think we are doing what we can. It's also hard to stay vigilant. It's to continue to do this day after day and wear a mask. And we've even had complaints of people saying, well, your driver wasn't wearing a mask. And when we do the investigation, it's because the bus was empty. And so we've dealt with those. It's not been a discipline issue with the drivers at all, but doing everything we can to support them.
I'm very gratified to hear that. And every time I see a bus driving by, I have to take a moment. So I hope that they will continue to feel supported. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Then we can close that out and go to CEO report 4.2. Matt, the highlights for us.
Yeah, just a couple other operational issues to mention. We've already discussed the temporary service plan, but we will be reopening the transit centers. It's about time. We are going to be monitoring it closely, and we're working with the city in particular, but I was also speaking with the head of the county the other day about how social needs are going to be stressed come this winter. So let's, for example, think about the homeless population that tends to be in downtown Ann Arbor because that's where the services are. The shelters generally ask people to leave during the day, and those folks need a warm place to go. In normal times, frankly, they circulate through the community from one location to another. The bus terminal is one place they sometimes go because it has a public restroom. The library is another place they sometimes go. And then there are businesses in a variety of other places. Well, as we've seen already, sometime the library has demonstrated that it will shut down its downtown branch for a couple of weeks if they have incidents. We've been working closely with the city on the need for public bathrooms. With the library shut and our terminal shut, frankly, there weren't any for a little while earlier this year. So we're going to be reopening our terminal for a couple of reasons. One is to have a functioning bus terminal and a place where people can buy passes and tokens and get all their material. The other is to help the community because we're in a position to help the community by also providing a public restroom. However, we are going to limit the number of people that are in the building at any one time. We will have, I think we have a security firm there. It's going to be like a really nice nightclub with a really pleasant bouncer. At least that's how I've envisioned it. But we're just going to sort of limit how many people are in at once and how often people are in the bathroom and that sort of thing. We're going to see if we can do this, and hopefully it will be something that we can manage through. But again, because we can. We also launched our no contact fare payment, our mobile ticketing system. So that's going very well. Slow uptake, but we're really glad to see the uptake that is there. As Brian mentioned, the permanent driver shields are being installed in terms of a sense of safety. We really hope that that's something the drivers appreciate. For everything we've heard is that they do. And even once the pandemic is over, that will represent a big jump in the safety of our staff when they're working alone. We did get some cost updates from the RTA pertaining to the commuter rail line between Ann Arbor and Detroit. Some significant changes there. Federal funding, there was a lot of hope for additional relief packages throughout this year. There are now several pieces of transportation funding legislation, essentially in parking in DC. Everything's stopped for the election. So hopefully we'll see some movement afterwards. The FTA has very graciously allowed us and others to delay our tri-annual every 3-year review, just recognizing staff capacity is needed with other things. And so we really appreciate the FTA's forbearance on that. It wasn't just for us. I think they're doing it for many systems. And I think that that's probably a pretty good synopsis. One final thing, you should have received an email today about the Nova Bus from Mary Boonin. If you'd like to come and have a look at the prototype, please let us know. Happy to arrange an appointment for you to come in. We're also arranging sort of virtual test drives for the general public, so people will be able to tour the bus virtually, if not in person. So that concludes my report, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Questions from the board or comments?
So I just have a comment regarding the new buses. I think it might be helpful with those buses to include, I don't know if it's on a placard or something, where the funding came for that. Because I just want to make sure that the optics are and the expectations are set correctly, that the public understands, like in this time of COVID, right, when we're crunched for money, that kind of stuff, that the money came from sources X, Y, and Z, and it wasn't like we were pulling funds from other buckets to support that endeavor.
It's an excellent thought, and in writing some of the press release material for that, I think we stressed that these are replacement buses. As older buses are wearing out, they're being replaced. Let me think about how we would recognize the funding. I take your point that new buses coming in when we're tightening our belt otherwise might seem odd. We are deferring 1 year worth of replacements. You may remember that was a sort of 11th hour change in the capital budget for exactly these reasons. But the first year's order is in and coming. So helping people understand that, I think, is an excellent point. And one other thing, Ms. Mosick-Betts had asked months ago, before the pandemic, about where the rear destination sign is on the bus. And I would direct you to the last page of your packet, the picture in the middle, the second one of that packet. You can see the rear of the vehicle, and up at the top right-hand corner is a black square at the very top of the bus. That's the destination sign. That's what's going to light up with a route number. So even if the buses are nose to tail along a curb, that should be very, very visible to any pedestrian approaching from the rear, and will help to distinguish our buses from other buses in the community.
Thank you. Kathleen, go ahead.
Am I remembering correctly, these Nova buses were ordered before the pre-pandemic? I mean, these were our replacement buses for this year. And so I would hope that the public would be understanding that replacement buses are taken care of, and these orders were not made after the pandemic happened, but were just part of normal business of bus replacement and good state of repair. So I hope that helps clarify a little bit for the public as well.
Sure, I think it's a good idea to emphasize it. The members of the public may not know that it's usually a 12-month lag time from the time you order a bus to when it's delivered. So you're absolutely correct. These are fiscal year 2020 vehicles, I believe. So they would have been ordered last fall, so a year ago. But I think the perception and the optics that Rich raised, we will certainly be emphasizing the point, if we get any questions, that they're replacement buses, not expansion buses, and they're funded primarily by the state and federal government, and they are routine replacements.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so we can close that out, and that is section 4. We'll move on to section 5, emergent business. Anything that wasn't anticipated that anybody wants to raise at this point in time? Not seeing anything, then we'll go to item 6, some closing items. We can start with public comment. Again, the raise your hand button, or I think it's star 6 or 9. Sorry, I can't remember. But do we have anybody who wants to make a comment to the board this evening?
Thank you, Chairman Mahler. We do. We have Mr. Mogensen. Mr. Mogensen, you've been unmuted.
Yes, so I just wanted to first say that I'd like to have a back and forth with what I was thinking is, I know who the right people for you to be in contact with about the homeless population might be to be helpful. And since I didn't hear about it at my meeting on Wednesday, perhaps I could be in contact with Keith, and we can figure out how to direct things. But there's some folks in the county who are working on the rotating shelter stuff. The folks who are Dan, who's in charge of the shelter association, some other folks who might be able to help in managing when you start on the 26th, opening up the transit centers. So there are some things is getting good information out to the right people is really kind of critical. The second thing was about the question about ridership as the amount of service increases. My sense has been, I had an equip at City Council, the Ann Arbor City Council meeting at one point, saying in Ann Arbor, all controversial questions have no more than 3 degrees of separation from the word park. And the train station has a parking, right? It's a parking lot and it's on parkland. And anyway, so what can happen is if enough people at the university are able to do things remotely at home and are not driving into the university, parking at the university becomes less of a problem, which is my sense of why people park at the park and ride lots and take the bus in to work at the university, is that it's just easier to do that from a parking standpoint. And that's also why when art fair was happening, there would be a lot of people who would use the buses locally who normally don't use it at any other time of the year because there's no place to park downtown when the art fair is happening. So if that is happening, and people are trying and have vehicles and would normally be choice riderships, they will not choose to get on a bus for the most part, many people, if they have a place to park. So if the demand for parking is less because people are working remotely, it would make sense that that would happen. So you might also want to see what's happening at the park and ride lots. And finally, this is one of these questions I had, of course, not anticipated the pandemic, but you may remember I knew I had a sense that the question about ridership versus coverage was kind of baked into one of the issues relating to the dynamics of ridership in this area, and has implications from political standpoint and millage standpoint. Is that here it is, right? And so because FlexRide is probably more expensive than fixed route bus service, but less expensive than paratransit bus service, making all of those dynamics works is going to be the key to moving forward as you move forward with the restoration, because people are expecting to restore service to the way it used to be. And some of the changes that were happening with the pandemic are happening as a result of policy changes, not just the pandemic. They were in process of happening anyway. So I just bring that up. And as always, thank you very much for your time and attention.
Okay, thank you. Keith, do we have anybody else?
Yes, we do, Chairman Mahler. The last 3 digits are 306. You've been unmuted.
Thank you. Michelle Barney, Chittister Place. I have been very concerned because of all the crazy people there are rebelling against masks and sensible behaviors. If we see a passenger coming in and harassing the driver, threatening them, etc., what I'd really like to ask is, does the driver have any way to call the police? But I suppose you wouldn't tell me if they did. If I would call the police, say I'm in the back and I see this scene unfold, are the police able to respond quickly? Do they recognize this as a problem for the drivers and protect the drivers from hostile passengers?
If that's an open question, we do have steps to protect our drivers in cases of threatening situations. So they are protected, and we have a good working relationship with the police to help protect our operators at all times.
Good, because I obviously don't expect you to tell me or tell anyone on this relatively public medium, but it's been on my mind and I'm worried for them. The other thing is you changed the time point from Chittister Place to the drugstore. I forget the street. There used to be nobody there. Why was that changed? The number 45 route, I'm sorry, I should make that clear. The time point used to be at Chittister Place. And it had a set time to be there, and we knew when that was. And of course, in bad weather, it can be delayed. But now, Chittister is no longer the time point. So we have to come out when they would be leaving the drugstore, whatever that street is, and wait until it gets there. Why was it changed?
We will have somebody from the staff reach out to you about that, Michelle.
Because that wasn't clear to me. The first time I went out at what should be the time, the bus had already gone. And when I called information downtown, they explained, no, that's not the time point. Okay. Well, thank you. When did you say that the bathroom is going to be open downtown? When is that change going to be made?
I'm not sure I did, but I don't know if somebody from the staff can answer that at this time or not.
The bathrooms will be open the 26th.
Of this month, of October?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, thank you. Because there are many of us obviously not junkies and not homeless, but by the time I've ridden from Chittister Place through 2 buses to downtown Ann Arbor, I probably need a restroom, and I appreciate that that is going to be open. Thank you. Okay, I'm done. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anybody else?
We do not have anyone else at this time.
Okay. Our next item, agenda item, is to go into a closed session for a briefing. As indicated on our agenda, we need a vote to do that, to go into closed session. So I'll take a roll call to do that. We'll just go down and vote yes or no if you wish to go into closed session at this point. Mike, yes or no?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also yes. So at this point, the board will go into closed session. I think we got instructions electronically from Mr. Book earlier today. If you didn't get that, raise your hand at this point and we'll have them re-forwarded. If not, then we will leave this meeting and go to the closed session meeting, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
Yeah, can I get that re-forwarded, Keith?
Keith, can you re-forward it to Ryan? Thank you.
Yes, I'll be happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in a minute. Everybody. See Ryan, Roger, Mike, Kyra, Kathleen, Sue, Jesse, me, Raymond, Rich. We got everybody. All right, so closed session is over. Topics for the next meeting. Well, we don't have any listed here, but I'm sure we'll have a few. Board retreat. This will come up again, etc. Don't forget 6.4, the board assessment, the electronic meeting in the packet. And 6.5, can I have a motion to adjourn? Sue, seconded by Rich. We'll go down the list to adjourn. Mike? Okay, so yes. Rich?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. So thank you, everybody. Meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening.